All right, welcome back, guys. So in the last video, we saw how we can create endpoints for retrieving listings and listing details for the normal users. And now in this video, we're going to see how to create our next Realtor endpoints, which are going to be for updating and deleting listings. Now, in particular for the update endpoints, we're going to have two different kinds of update endpoints. We're going to have one for updating the entire listing itself, and we're also going to have one for just updating that is published piece of data. So those are going to be the endpoints that we create. So one thing I want to note is I have my backend running as well as my database, so make sure you're doing the same. And now let's open up our listing app, views.py, and this is where we're going to be working in this video. So in particular, we're going to go back into this manage listing view. And then inside of here, I'm going to define another method, which I'm going to put right below this post. So right over here, I'm going to define a put method. This is going to be the one for updating the listing. And then I'm going to pass in self and request to this. And then I'm also going to wrap this entire request in a try except in case if anything happens to go wrong. And then if anything goes wrong, I'll just say something went wrong when updating listing. And then in this try part, first thing I'm going to do is retrieve the user who's making this request. So I'm going to grab that from request.user. And then I want to check, is this user a realtor? So that's something we've done previously. So I'm just going to copy that from this post endpoint. So this right here, if not user.isRealtor, then we're going to return an error response. So I'm going to go down. And then inside of here, I'm going to paste this and then just tweak this message. So user does not have necessary permissions for updating this listing or this listing data. And then after that, we're going to retrieve the data. This is going to come from request.data. And then there's going to be a lot of data that we retrieve in here. Now this data, it's going to be the exact same as inside of my post. So if I take a look at that, we grab the data, then we have the title, the slug, and then we do this filtering to see if a listing with a slug exists. Then we grab these fields here, then the price, then we convert that to an integer, then the bedrooms, convert that to an integer, grab the bathrooms, convert that to a float, and then do these checks on the bathrooms, and then round it to one decimal place, and then grab the sale type, and then do these if checks, same thing with the home type, and then grab these photos, is published, and then convert the is published to be a Boolean value, and finally we created the listing. Now everything before this part is going to be the exact same. So I think one thing that makes sense is to make a separate method inside of this class-based view, which is just going to be responsible for giving us all this data appropriately. Now, if we were just retrieving data and weren't doing all these checks and conversions and whatnot, then maybe I wouldn't put this in a separate method, but because we are, I think it makes sense. So right above this post method, I'm going to define a brand new method, which I'm going to call retrieve values. I'm going to pass in self and data. It's going to accept as a parameter. And then what this is going to do is everything after this part right here. So from this title, I'm going to select everything all the way down to that is published check I have. So is published is true. Then we convert it to one of these Boolean values. So I'm going to cut all of this. So now we have this right here. And I'm going to paste it all inside of this retrieve values method. So there we are. So now we have all of that inside of here. Now I just have to fix up this indenting. So I'm going to select all of this and just indent it over one line. So indent it one to the left. So now it's proper. And now I'm going to put all these values in a dictionary, and then I'm going to return it. So I'm going to have a variable called data, which is going to be this dictionary, and ultimately I'm going to return data. So this data, it's going to have all these sorts of values that I have inside of this model. So to make this easier, I'm just going to grab this title all the way down to the is published and just copy all of this. That way it's a lot easier to make this dictionary here. So I'm going to paste all that in here. I'm going to indent over twice. I'm going to select the space equals space part so I can select all of these. And then I'm going to do a shift command right click to select all of this. I'm going to delete. I'm going to put a colon. Then I'm going to put a space. And I'm just going to put title, comma. So now what I'm going to do is all of these have to be in quotes. So I'm going to go through, put them all in quotes. And then I just have to make sure the values are correct. So I'm going to go through and just do this. All right, and there we are. So now what this did is it's going to have all of these keys have the appropriate value. So for instance, this is published is now going to be a Boolean value, and then this home type, sale type are going to be the correct value, and then this bathrooms is going to be a decimal value, which is rounded to 1 decimal place. Then we're going to have the bathrooms be an integer, same with the price. So it's just going to filter all of these appropriately and put them inside of here and return it for us. So now inside of this post, after we retrieve the data from the request, now what we need to do is data is self.retrieve values, and then we just have to pass in data. So this data, which is the data from the request, we're going to pass into this method, and then it's going to return this data, which is going to be this right here. And then we're going to store it back inside of this variable. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have separate variables for all of these different values. So from this title all the way down to this is published, so I'm just going to copy all this to make this a little bit easier. I'm going to paste it here. And then I'm going to select this colon space part, do a Command D to select all of these. Then I'm going to delete, do a space, equals space, then spell data, put one of the square brackets, put a quote. Then I'm going to do Command right click. I'm going to delete once, put another quote, then close the square bracket, and there we are. And now this final one right here, I ended up deleting the D, so I'm just going to put that back because I didn't have a comma here, but for all these other ones I did. And now I just have to remove all of these quotes here. All right, and there we are. So now we have all of these stored in variables once again, except now it's a lot more cleaned up because we don't have all those different checks happening. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this part here, because this right here is the exact same thing that we're going to be doing inside of that put method. So now I can scroll down to that put method right over here, and then right below this right here, I can just paste, and there we go. Now I have all of these values in a nice and clean way. And now below this is published, I'm going to do an if check for if not listing.objects.filter, where realtor is user.email, and slug is equal to slug.exists. Then if that's the case, I'm going to return a response. It's going to be an error, and it's going to say listing does not exist. I'm going to have status of status.htp 404 not found. So we're going to be looking for this listing we're trying to update, and it has to belong to this realtor who's making the request. And then if that's the case, then we can continue on. Otherwise, we'll return this error response. And then our next step is going to be to update. Now, this is going to be very similar to the create we did in the post. So I think to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to copy that create that we did. So that's right over here. So I'm going to grab this part. I'm going to do a Command C, go back down, then a Command V, and then we're going to do a dot filter in this case. And then I'm going to filter where the realtor is user.email and slug is slug, because now we know it exists based off of this check. And then I'm going to do a dot update. Then we're going to be updating these values here. Now we're not going to be updating this realtor value. That's going to stay the same, so I can remove that one. But as for all these other values, they can remain right here. So these are all things that we grabbed inside of this request, and then we can do a full-blown update, which is why we're using the put method. And then after this, I can just return a success response. So I'm just going to have success and then listing updated successfully. That way the user knows that everything went okay. And then in the case of an update, I think a status code that makes sense is a 200. So I'm going to send back a status of status.htp 200 okay. And I just want to make sure I did a 201 created on that last request. Okay, good. Because we're creating data in the database. In this case, we're not, so a 200 okay makes more sense. All right, so there we are. Now we can actually go ahead and test this. So I can go back into Postman. I can open this up, and this is now going to be a put request. And it's going to be to HTTP localhost 8000/API/listings/manage. So it's just like how we have with the create. So API/listings/manage, except instead of a post, now it's going to be a put. And one thing I'm realizing now, what would make this easier is instead of doing it this way, I can actually go to this create, click this drop down, and do a duplicate. And then I can just edit this. So I'm going to edit the name. So instead of being create listing, it's going to be update listing. And then I just have to change this from a post to a put. Because all of this data, this is all stuff I'm going to be passing in this request. So instead of typing this all out once again and putting all these values here, I think it makes more sense to just do this duplication, and that's going to make this a lot easier. So now I can save that, and then I can tweak one of these values, and then we can make sure this works. So in order to send off a request to this, we need to make sure we have the correct authorization header. Because if I send it off as is right now, the token is now invalid. That's currently here. So I'm going to open up this login for Realtor user. I'm going to send off a request. I'm going to grab this access token. And I'm going to go back to this right here. And it looks like I did the renaming the opposite. So let me actually put this back to a post. Save that. I'm going to open up this one. Make this one the put. So the data is the exact same. So it has all the exact same values as here. I just didn't notice I kind of mismatched there. So anyway, let's go to the headers now. I'm going to go ahead and place this access token here. I'm going to save that, and let's see what we want to tweak. So maybe the price is something I could tweak. So maybe this was on sale for a while, and now it went down in value. So maybe 649,999 is the price now. And then all these other values, I guess, they can remain the same. So let's just test out this update right here. So if I send that off, so it looks like something went wrong. And it looks like here we got a 200 OK. So that means that my response right here, I didn't pass the status code to it. So status is status.http 500 internal server error. And I'm noticing I made a typo here. So this should be realtor is equal to user.email. So I did it good here. So that's why I got that 500 internal server error, just a small typo I noticed. So it should work now. So I'm going to send this off, and it's still not working. All right, so the issue is coming from that retrieve values method that we made. So there was one thing I added in there that I shouldn't have, and that was right over here, this check for if listings.objects.filter where slug is slug already exists. Now this is something that will only be happening when we're creating a listing, but not when we're updating. So I'm just going to cut this from here, and I'm going to put it back inside of that post. So that's where it should be. So I'm going to find my post method right over here. And then right below all of this stuff here is where I'm going to do that check. So right over here, and there we go. So now this is going to be in the appropriate location, and then everything else inside of that retrieve values method should be good now. So yeah. And then we can also test out creating a listing after once again. But for now, let's go back here, test out this updating. So we should be updating this price here. So I'm going to send this off now. All right, and it seems that we're having an issue with these photos again. So one thing I can do is I can remove these and re-upload them. Or another thing that I can do as a workaround is go into the settings, and then I can find the location here for the working directory. And then I can also just allow reading files outside the working directory. That's maybe one easy workaround for this. And then that way, if I can send this off now, it'll update it successfully because now these files are in my current working directory. Well, I guess they're outside of it, but they're allowed to be used. So now this gets updated successfully. So now if I go and open up the retrieve realtor listing, now what I can do is I can go back into here, grab my correct header, just so that this request actually works. I'm going to paste it into here, send that off, and we should see that home now updated. So there's the price that we updated it to. And then everything else is untouched now. So perfect. So that now deals with this one. Now we have to deal with our next update view, which is just going to be updating that one piece of data, which is for the is published. So we're going to go back now. And then right below this put method, we're going to create our next method. So it'll be right over here along this line. I'm going to define a patch method. Because a put method is if you're going to update the whole piece of data, patch is just like a piece of data. And I'm going to pass self and request to this. And I'm going to wrap this inside of a try except. And to make this easier, I'm going to grab this return here for the 500 internal server error. The message is going to be the same because, again, we're just updating the listing. I'm going to retrieve the user, and that's going to be from request.user. And then I'm going to do that authorization check. So that's something that we did over here. So that's this check right here. So I'm going to grab that. I'm going to go back down, and I'm going to place it right in here. And then that way we can check, is this user a realtor user? If they're not, we're going to return this response here. So user does not have necessary permissions for updating this listing data. So again, this is for updating, so this message makes sense. Then I'm going to retrieve the data. That's going to come from request.data. And then I'm going to grab the slug, which is going to come from data slug. And then I'm also going to grab the is published, which is going to come from data is published. So these are the only two pieces of data that we need. So the slug, so we know which listing to update, and the is published value, so that we know what to set it to. And then I'm going to do some checks here. So I'm going to do if is published is true as a string. Then I'm going to set is published to be the Boolean value true. And then otherwise, I'm going to set it to be the Boolean value false. And now with that, the next thing we have to do is make sure that this listing exists. So I'm going to do if not listing dot objects dot filter, where realtor is user dot email, and slug is slug dot exists. So if this does not exist, I'm going to return an error response. So we're going to have an error, and it's going to say listing does not exist. And I'm going to have a status of status.htp 404 not found. Otherwise, we're going to continue on, and then I'm going to update the listing. So I'm going to do listing.objects.filter, and I'm going to filter by these criteria. And I'm going to do a dot update. And then the only thing I'm updating is that is published piece of data to be my value of is published that was passed into here. And then after that, all that's left to do is just return a success response. So I'm going to return a response, and it's going to say success, listing, publish status, updated successfully. And again, this will be a 200 status code. And there we are. So now we can test out this one as well. So I'm going to go back to Postman. This time I'm not going to duplicate because we're not going to have all of these pieces of form data. We're just going to have the is published and the slug. So this is going to be a patch request. It's going to be to this exact same URL, so the API listing manage endpoint. So there we are. I'm going to have the same bear token. So I'm going to go back here, and then inside of my headers, I'm going to have an authorization header. And I'm going to paste this token in here. I'm also going to have content type, which will be application JSON. And I'm going to go to the body. And in this case, I'm going to pass raw data because I'm not going to have those image files. And then in here, I just have to pass the slug. And then I also have to pass the is published. So is published, I can set to say false, and slug, I'll put one that doesn't exist. So let's test that out. So I'm going to save this as update listing published state, something like that. I'm going to save that in listings, and then this listing folder. And let's send this off. So listing does not exist. Good. Now let's grab the correct slug. So the one I'm going to update is say for this one right here. So this 5 South Woodsman Lane. I'm going to copy that. And then this one right now is published is set to true. So when I send this request off, it should set it to false. So I'm going to go to my body, and then in the slug, I'm going to paste this in here. And I can also take a look at some other errors that we might be able to trigger. So there's this one if we pass an incorrect access token. So if the access token belongs to a normal user, then this is going to get triggered. And then we also have listing does not exist. So that's when we triggered. And then otherwise, we should just get the success. So let's go ahead, test that out now. I'm going to send this request. And there we go, success. Listing published status updated successfully. So now if I retrieve this realtor's listings, now we should see it get updated to be false. And there we are. Now it's false. And then I can also set it back to true, just like this. So send that off. It got updated successfully. And then back in here, I can send off a request again. And there we go, it's back to true. So now we have this request, which is much less resource demanding than our previous update one, which we could use to update a bunch of different values. This one's just for that one piece of data, which is the is published piece of data. So now we only have one request left to make, and that's going to be for the delete. So let's go back to the code and put this one together. So right over here, I'm going to define delete, pass in self and request. And then again, I'm going to wrap everything in a try except. And then I'm just going to copy this response here because in this except part, we're again going to have a 500 internal server error. And then this will just say something went wrong when deleting listing. And then first, we're going to retrieve the user making this request. So that's going to be coming from request.user. We're going to do that check to make sure that this is a Realtor user that's hitting this endpoint. So we're going to grab this. and put it right into here. That way we can check for if not user.isRealtor. So if this flag is not set, then we're going to return this error response. And then user does not have necessary permissions for deleting this listing data. Now, if they do have the necessary permissions, we're going to continue on. So we're going to grab the data, which is going to come from request.data. Then I'm going to grab the slug. That's the only piece of data that we need in order to know what this realtor is trying to delete. And then we want to make sure that this exists. So if not listing.objects.filter, where realtor is user.email and slug is slug.exists. So if this does not exist, I'm going to return an error response. So I'm going to have an error, and it's going to say listing you are trying to delete does not exist. And I'll have a status of status.htp 404 not found. And then if this check passes, then we can just go ahead and delete it. So I'm just going to copy this part here and paste it. So that way we can filter where the realtor is this user's email, and we have the slug here, and then we can just chain on a .delete. And that'll go ahead and delete this listing data. And then after that, we want to make sure that this worked. So I'm going to do an if not listing.objects.filter, and then it's going to be the same filter as this, and then .exists. So if it does not exist, so in this case, that was an error. But in this case, we just deleted it successfully. So if it no longer exists, that means this was successful. And then I can just return a success response. And then in this case, maybe I won't pass any data. So one common thing you see with delete requests is you can also do a status of 204 no content. So that's what I'm going to do in this case. I'm going to have a status of status.htp 204 no content. And then I'm not going to have any data along in this response. And then I'm going to have an else. And then this will be if something goes wrong, I'm going to return a response. So if for whatever reason this data still existed here after performing this delete, then that means there was an error. Now this should probably never happen, but just in case, we're going to handle this. And it's just going to say failed to delete listing. And that'll be a status of status.htp 400 bad request. And there we are. That's our delete request in place. Now there's just one final little tweak I want to make, and that's inside of this models. So one thing I want to do is when we delete, we're going to end up deleting the URL endpoints for these values here instead of the actual data that's stored inside of the media folder. So one good thing you can do in order to deal with this is you can define delete, pass in self, and then to delete the actual data inside of that media folder, what you can do is self.main photo. So that way I can select the main photo value and then do a .storage .delete and then do self.main photo .name. So based on this name, it's going to know what to delete. So that way we don't just delete where this points to, because this is going to be a URL. We're also going to delete the actual storage value. So what's stored inside of that media folder. And then I'm going to do the same thing for photo 1, 2, and 3. So I'm just going to copy down a line 3 times with Shift Option down key. And then this one here, it's going to be for photo 1. This one here is going to be for photo 2. And this one here for photo 3. So that way we can do the same thing for each of these photo values. Then finally I have to call super.delete. So that way we still perform the standard delete, except we do this part here as well. So this part here, it's just going to delete the values inside of the media folder. Then we're going to continue on with the actual delete, where we delete all the values. And then that includes these right here, where they have those URLs that would point to this data that's inside of that media folder. So there we are. I can now save that, and we can test out the delete. So I'm going to create a brand new endpoint, or I guess an endpoint request. This is going to be to delete. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this and plug it into here. And then as for our headers, we're going to need to be authorized. So I'm going to go ahead and save this right now. It's going to be delete listing. If I send this off as is, we have to be authenticated. So now I can go into my headers and grab this bearer and then the access token. Go back into this delete, go into my headers here, pass the authorization header, placing this inside of here. So that way I have this be correct. And if I send this off right now, Looks like this is no longer valid. So it looks like I'm actually gonna have to get a brand new access token here. So let's grab that login for Realtor, grab a brand new access token, go back here, and place this in here, send that off. So there we go, something went wrong. So the thing that went wrong is we didn't pass our slug. So let's go ahead, pass the slug now. And by the way, if you want this to be more specific, you could easily just go here, go into your views, and then right over here, you could wrap this inside of a try except. So this is if you want a more specific error message for this, then you can return a response with an error. And then it says slug was not provided. Then you can have something like a 400 bad request. And there we are. So if I add that in and then I send this off, then we're going to see slug was not provided with a 400 bad request. Now you can do that with all of these other endpoints as well if you want. Although I'm going to not do that just to not spend so much time doing that. But if you do want very specific error messages, like let's say with your updating, if you want to have error messages like the title was not provided, or the bedroom value was not provided, bathroom value was not provided, and so forth, then you can always do that in this same approach. So anyway, now let's go ahead and try to delete one of these listings. So I'm going to pass some raw data, and all I need to pass is the slug. And let's go ahead and delete that latest listing that we made. So for the 5 South Woodsman Lane, first I'm going to test out something like this. Send that off. Listing you are trying to delete does not exist, so perfect. Now let's pass in a correct slug. And now this should delete this one right here. So I'm going to send that off. And there we go. We get the 204 no content. And here we see no content because we didn't pass anything back. So that means this was successful. And we can also confirm that by going here, sending this off. And looks like I have to update this. So let me go into my headers here, grab this, and update this one so we can send off this request. And now I should only see this one here for the 3 South Woodsman Lane. So there we are. And then because we made those changes with the refactors inside of that post method, which was for creating the listing, we can also test out creating this listing again. So I can send off this, although I will need to pass in the authorization header. So if I pass this, there we go. Listing created successfully. So now I can go ahead, retrieve, and there we go. We have this listing again. So that means everything is now in order with our Realtor endpoints. So that wraps up everything in terms of our Realtor endpoints. Now we have full CRUD functionality over our listing data. So that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. And then in our next video, we're going to see how we can have the normal users search for listings. So we're going to be doing that with the text search. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't yet, please hit that like button. It goes a long way to help a channel like mine grow and get recognized so others can benefit from the videos I release as well. Also, I have links in the description that you can check out. I have one for an e-commerce course that you can check out if you're interested in learning to develop an application like that. I also have a link for joining my Web Development Kings Facebook group. That way, if you want to personally ask me something, then you can go right ahead and do that, and I will happily help you out. It doesn't cost you anything, so if you're scratching your head about something, then you can go right ahead and ask me to help you out. Only questions I probably won't answer are if you want me to help you build some kind of personal project, as I don't quite have the time for that sort of thing, but anything else is fair game. You can also post something in the group itself, that way other developers in the group can help you out with something as well. The group is all about growing your expertise as a developer, so if you're interested in that, then go right ahead, click that link in the description, and join the family. Also, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notification bells, that way you don't miss out when I release a new video, and I'll see you in the next one.